Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, October 18th. We begin with the Emergencies Act public inquiry, which continued today, most recently hearing from the City of Ottawa's top elected official. Ottawa's outgoing mayor testified at the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy protest in February. Jim Watson told the commission that his city's back was against the wall. He said protesters were showing complete disrespect to the residents of his city. He says that he wrote that in a letter appealing for help from other levels of government. Mr. Watson says the city needed a large police response just to get the situation under control. The University of Toronto's Citizen Lab is criticizing federal cybersecurity legislation. It says Bill C-26 is so flawed that it could allow authoritarian governments to justify their own repressive laws. Its report on Bill C-26 includes 29 recommendations to bolster transparency and accountability. The report urges officials to meaningfully amend its legislation and make it both more accountable and transparent. It adds that if the Trudeau government declines, it will have passed a bad law. Tragedy in Montreal, where police have arrested one man and say two children are dead after they were called to a home north of the city. A 45-year-old Quebec father was charged with first-degree murder Tuesday after two of his children were killed in the family home in Laval, Quebec. Kamaljit Arora was charged despite being unable to appear for his arraignment, either in person or by video from hospital. A spokeswoman for police in Laval says an 11-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl were taken to hospital where they were pronounced dead. On the West Coast, a British Columbia community has declared a state of local emergency. Several businesses and amenities on BC's Sunshine Coast have been told to stop using treated water later today due to a severe drought. The Sunshine Coast Regional District, about 70 kilometers north of Vancouver, has declared a local state of emergency, but officials are advising the public to stay calm. The district's general manager of infrastructure services says there is enough water in the main reservoir to last until mid-November, and that the conservation efforts are aimed at reducing the chances of running out. A new analysis from Nature Canada says the country is underestimating the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the forestry industry. The report from Nature Canada and the Natural Resources Defence Council says Canada is using questionable methods for GHG predictions. The report's finding says that the forestry industry in some years actually produced emissions comparable to Alberta's oil sands. The Natural Resources Defence Council says the government's calculations are misleading. All right, well, meanwhile, a new holiday outlook says retailers won't see as much of a profit this year compared to years prior. Deloitte Canada's new holiday retail outlook says overall spending this season is expected to fall 17%. The drop follows rising grocery bills and overall inflation. Deloitte predicts the average Canadian will spend close to $1,500 this holiday season, and it says consumers plan to start shopping earlier and hunt for deals in a bid to stretch their buying power. All right, taking a look at the housing market now. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the annual pace of housing starts in September was up 11% from a year earlier. It says the annual rate of 299,589 units was the highest since last November. The National Housing Agency says the annual pace of urban starts rose 12%. This while the rate of multi-unit urban starts advanced by 16%. The pace of single detached urban starts was flat. Representatives from the European Union and 28 other countries are touring Saskatchewan this week. Premier Scott Moe says the province has the food, fuel, and fertilizer that the world needs, and such diplomatic missions strengthen its place on the world stage. In Regina, the heads of mission from Ottawa's Foreign Diplomatic Corps are to visit the legislature, a tech incubator, a farm, a food terminal, and the lieutenant governor. They'll then head to Saskatoon. This is where stops are to include a diamond laboratory, a distillery, and Winnescuin Heritage Park. A Toronto-based college says it is dropping its COVID-19 vaccine mandate at the end of the year. Seneca College was one of the last post secondary institutions in the country requiring everyone on campus to be fully vaccinated. The college's president called the decision to scrap the policy come January 1st regretful but necessary. He says the college's mask mandate will remain in place until further notice. All right, stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. When we return, we're going to be taking a look at the risks of recession as more economic predictions are released. Stay with us. A new economic outlook by the Conference Board of Canada joins others that predict the likeliness of a recession in 2023. It says a recession is possible, but the underlying conditions are working in the economy's favor. The think tank says it expects there will be essentially zero economic growth from the second half of this year through to the first quarter of 2023. It says whether that meets a technical definition of a recession will depend on some ultra fine-tuned estimates, which will not be entirely visible in the annual numbers. Scotiabank Economics chief economist and senior vice president also predicts the Canadian economy will enter a technical recession in the first half of 2023. Well, joining us now to give us his outlook on this is Dr. Moshe Lander, an economics professor at Concordia University with expertise in recessions. Dr. Lander, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello.
So, what are you taking away from this latest economic data, Dr. Lander, and what is your overall outlook?
Well, I mean, the fact is that the economy is slowing down. And so we had this nice little blip in the early part of the year when the COVID restrictions were being lifted across the country, and everybody wanted to get out and enjoy themselves. And, higher interest rates, high inflation, and maybe a little bit of fatigue from all of that early partying is, in fact, dragging the economy down. And as you said in your lead there, are we at a technical point of a recession or not? We're going to see that data in the next couple of weeks, and that'll give us a much better indication as to whether it's just mildly positive or mildly negative growth that we're seeing.
Now, if we were to enter a technical or mild recession in 2023, what would that look like for Canada, according to the information that we have so far?
That's the amazing thing, Nima, is that the way that it looks is really very micro oriented. It's not a macro sort of thing that happens, right? If you have a job, if your friends have a job, if your family have jobs, then I could tell you we're in the most severe recession, and you'd look around and say, really, I don't see it. And if you're out of work and your friends are out of work and your family's out of work, and I say the economy's doing well, you'd say, I don't see it. And so that's one of those things that, where these banks and the conference board are talking about technical definition, not technical definition. The issue really does come down to how do you personally experience it? And I'd say that if you have a job and if you can put food on the table and you can pay your bills, then recession schmession, you're probably fine. And I think that's the way that a lot of us are going to experience the recession if it happens.
And are there any industries or particular jobs that will likely be most impacted by a technical or mild recession in the coming year?
The financial sector is the one that's probably been overheating the most, right? We've been talking a lot in the last couple of months about the housing market being dragged down. Anything that's interest rate sensitive, so that could be the construction industry, would also probably suffer under the weight of these high inflation rates. Consumer spending is probably going to decline, and so where are you spending your money? Retail is probably going to suffer. Food and beverage industry, I hate to say, could suffer, and the tourism industry could suffer because the recession is probably not going to be isolated to Canada alone. And where we're hearing about other countries that are experiencing economic hard times, they might not be showing up in Canada to spend their limited disposable income dollars because they just don't have it to spend.
And in terms of some positive news, Dr. Lander, we mentioned the Conference Board of Canada saying that the underlying conditions are working in the economy's favor. So, in what ways is that true?
I think if we're heading for a recession, we're heading into it in good shape, right? We've been talking about labor shortages, right? That everybody's desperate for workers, and so the fact is that there's a lot of good news within the economy. Unemployment is near record lows. Inflation is on its way down. It's not down to where it should be, but it's moving in the right direction. And the fact is that we came out of this COVID experience relatively better placed than a lot of other countries. The government debt, while it jumped a lot because of all of that spending, fact is that it's at a manageable level still. And so there's probably room that if we do enter a recession, there should be areas where governments can offer some spending support without it breaking the bank for them.
All right, Dr. Lander, in terms of the long term, when can Canadians expect some relief from these interest rate hikes and inflation overall?
So, inflation is now at, say, a 15-year high. But, to say it's a 15-year high, it's because for the 15 years leading up to that, it was at a very low level, and we're not that far above it. So, we're going to see interest rates go up a little bit. We're going to see that inflation takes about 12 to 18 months before it comes back down to something resembling normal. But the things are moving in the right directions, at least. And so, I think it's merely a matter of how do you view that road to normality? Is that a good experience? Is it a bumpy experience? But at least it's heading in the right direction. And so that's the way that I would say that if you can try and approach this in an optimistic sort of way, it actually does good things for the economy because psychology is going to matter here. And if we see doom and gloom, that's the type of thing that massively chokes back spending and makes a shallow recession much worse. People stay optimistic that good times are just around the corner. It's the type of thing that really can actually be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
All right, Dr. Lander, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Anytime.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. And when we return, we're going to take a look at Canada's relationship with Taiwan. As China continues to assert its global and regional dominance, President Xi Jinping targeted relations with Taiwan, in particular at the Communist Party Congress on Sunday. In his opening speech at the start of the party Congress, Mr. Xi said his government will continue to strive for peaceful reunification with Taiwan. But he said he will never promise to renounce the use of force and that he reserves the option of taking all measures necessary. Now, this comes as the U.S. continues to show its support for the self-ruled island. This with President Biden saying last month that the U.S. would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack. China has long made Taiwan a strategic priority, but the self-ruled island also has importance to other countries, including Canada. A new Macdonald Laurier report looks into the importance of Canada-Taiwan relations in particular. In it, author Scott Simon argues that Canada needs to do a lot more. Well, he joins us now to tell us more about this. Dr. Simon, welcome to Forum Daily.
Yep, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Now, the Chinese government has always deemed Taiwan as part of its territory,
Mhm.
but lately it's been pursuing unification more aggressively. So why is that?
Well, I think that first of all, it hasn't always been part of China, and the Chinese leaders have known that. In fact, in 1936, none other than Chairman Mao Zedong said to Edgar Snow that Formosa it was part of Japan back then, and he said that we would hope that they actually hoped that in their struggle for independence that they could get some hope from China, and so it has not always been part of China, and that was very clear. It was part of Japan.
So, what makes the Taiwan Strait an international issue? We're seeing a lot of
Yeah.
countries show support for Taiwan's case here.
Yeah, so I think what's happening is, well, first of all, we'll head back to China there, but on I think that she is pursuing this more aggressively right now because this fits into his domestic agenda very much. And so he's got so many problems at home, economic problems, of course, the COVID, they're trying to do a zero COVID policy. But this is really one issue that he feels can frame the Chinese Communist Party as bringing a solution. And so over the past few decades, they've basically brainwashed the Chinese people into believing that Taiwan is rightfully theirs. And so he's trying to really show himself as the person who can protect China's interests against what they're framing as US intervention. And so what makes it an international issue? That's a very good question. Basically, it goes back to the end of World War II. And like I just said, that it used to belong to Japan. Well, Japan lost World War II. And as a result, the 49 countries got together in San Francisco and they negotiated the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which put an end to the state of war with Japan. And so during that peace treaty negotiation process, there was the issue of what to do with Taiwan. And actually, Canada was part of that, saying that, they sent a memo to Washington, and this got taken up, that the best way to deal with any controversies, because this was 1951 already, but who should get Taiwan, was to not specify it in the treaty. And as a result of that, it was not specified. That kind of got kicked down the road a bit, and then Tokyo signed with Taipei diplomatic relations. And so, in a very real way, Taiwan became part of the Republic of China in that because of those treaties things. And because it is an international treaty with 49 signatory parties, this is an international issue. And so any change that happens is an issue for the international community. China likes to spin it as exclusively a domestic issue, but that is completely wrong from the viewpoint of the treaty history.
All right, Doctor. Got about a minute left here, but your report is looking into what Canada can do in this situation moving forward.
Mhm.
So, what kind of steps are you urging Canada to take here?
Basically, I think we should keep doing everything we're doing. I think we should sign the free trade agreement that was already promised last January. I think we have to keep our naval forces going through the Taiwan Strait every year. And just, we've got companies on the ground there, like Northland Power is there in the wind farms off the coast of Taiwan. And just be there and not be afraid of what China will do. We have our own independent relationship with Taiwan, which we've had for 150 years, and we should just keep going strong as we have been.
All right, Doctor. Looks like we've got a quick 20 seconds left here, but what are you watching for as these tensions continue between Taiwan and the Chinese government?
Yeah, so basically I'm concerned that China may continue with their wolf diplomacy. I think that the diplomats like to score points back home, and lots more pressure on Canada. We just saw Chinese diplomats in Manchester in the UK who manhandled protesters in front of their consulate. And I think we should be watching very carefully about the behavior of Chinese diplomats in our own country.
All right, Dr. Simon, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back. Up next, we'll have the major news stories and headlines from around the world, so stay tuned. Ukraine's president is defining the recent Russian strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure as a campaign to force the nation into the cold and dark. President Volodymyr Zelensky says nearly one-third of Ukraine's power stations have been destroyed in the past week alone. This is causing massive blackouts across the country. Russian airstrikes cut power and water supplies to hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians this week. Mr. Zelensky tweeted, "No space left for negotiations with Putin's regime." He noted that any attempt at peace talks with the Russian leader will fail. All right, well, meanwhile, Moscow is actively refusing to confirm or deny the use of Iranian suicide drones in its attacks on Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says they don't have any information on the matter. The Iranian Shahed drones reportedly have been rebranded as Zharan 2 by Russia, and they have been used extensively to carry out strikes across Ukraine. The explosive strapped drones have been seen flying overhead and bombing strategic targets. As nationwide protests continue within Iran, concerns are growing over the return of a female Iranian competitive climber who defied her nation's mandatory headscarf during a competition. Elnaz Rekabi has left South Korea after competing in an event in which she climbed without her hijab. Farsi language media outside of Iran warned that she may have been forced to leave early by Iranian officials, and she could face arrest back home. Now, this was a claim quickly denied by Tehran. All of this comes as protests that were sparked by the death in custody of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini are continuing for a fifth week. Ms. Amini was arrested for wearing her hijab too loosely. Moving to a new report by a UK-based nonprofit. It says the Taliban captured, bound, and shot 27 men to death in Afghanistan's Panjshir province last month. Now, this was part of their operations against resistance forces in the area. Videos of extrajudicial killings circulated on social media in mid-September. This with the Taliban saying they would investigate the deaths if the videos were verified. Tuesday's report by Afghan Witness say that the killings demonstrate an orchestrated purge of opposition fighters. In France, protests against inflation have spread through various sectors. Several industries are going on strike to protest the government's intervention in a refinery strike. They're also calling for pay hikes that keep up with rising inflation. Rail and other transportation workers, trucking and bus companies, some high school teachers, and public hospital employees have joined the oil workers' strike. Similar protests have erupted around Europe in recent months. This comes as people complain about the impact of inflation, causing disruptions like canceled flights and trains. Meanwhile, Britain's prime minister is scrambling to recover her grasp on power. This comes after her economic plans were ripped up by a Treasury chief that she was forced to appoint. Ms. Truss remains in office for now, largely because her Conservative Party is divided over how to replace her. Ms. Truss held a cabinet meeting this morning. This was where her spokesman says there was an in-depth discussion of the new economic plan, and no one asked her to resign. Ms. Truss acknowledges that mistakes were made, but she insists that she would lead the Conservatives into the next national election. South of our border, a U.S. government committee has revealed that Donald Trump's private company billed the Secret Service. Now, this was for rooms at his hotels in excess of government-approved rates. The Trump Organization denies doing anything that's improper. It says it provided rooms at cost. The committee claims more than $1.4 million was paid to Trump properties in all. All right, turning to recent moves by Australia, which is doubling back on a previous government's decision to recognize West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Former Conservative Prime Minister Scott Morrison formally recognized West Jerusalem as Israel's capital 4 years ago. But Foreign Minister Penny Wong says the current government will now recognize Tel Aviv as the capital. Mr. Morrison's government was elected out of office in May after 9 years in power. Rapper and singer Drake has won several songwriting prizes at the 2022 SOCAN Awards. The Toronto music star received 2 rap music awards for his singles Wants and Needs and Way Too Sexy. This was at a Toronto gala celebrating the best in Canadian songwriting, composing, and music publishing. The evening bash also recognized Yukon artist Stephen Kozmienuk, who claimed Songwriter of the Year in the producer category. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.